What if it does actually take like an entire decade plus for you to realize that you didn't actually need the toxic person or the toxic people in your life? I have recently come to a realization because there was a period of a decade plus in my life when I was, before that at least, when I was kind of uncertain that cutting somebody out or even multiple people out was the right path forward. It's wild how before we do it, before we even consider doing it, we realize that we have all of these emotional attachments in play, right? We have this connection, we have the ties to this person or these multiple people, right? We're realizing that the relationship isn't healthy, but it's also challenging to move on because the path forward looks uncertain, right? About a decade out, even more, I started to consider letting go of and cutting out people. And I also looked at it as a challenge because I was a very different person 10 plus years ago than I am today. And I am grateful for that because that actually required me to get uncomfortable and to step outside of what it was that I was doing and the relationships that I was holding. By the way, shout out to the sun for blasting on my face right now. um, Letting go of people can be challenging, right? Relationships can be very comfortable. And even if they're toxic, the comfort and familiarity of the toxicity, because it is comfortable and familiar to childhood, can be something that we hold on to, we tie ourselves to. Getting away from that can be a challenge. I saw relationships in my life that were toxic, that were unhealthy, that were not going to aid my future, right? And so what I basically did was I said, I need to get uncomfortable. I need to go through this process and I need to cut out these people and let go of them, right? Now, the fascinating thing about this whole thing is that this is so similar to like the same thing of, maybe you focused a lot on a test or an exam in high school, right? I don't think about anything regarding high school anymore. Um, that's just the way that it is. And I think that a lot of people can probably vibe with that, right? And this is also the same thing as letting go of a job that does not make you feel passionate about yourself or about life or about the job itself, right? In the moment, it might seem kind of scary because you might look outside of it and be like, well, I don't really know the path forward. There's a lot of uncertainty in that regard, and I'm not entirely sure how to approach it, right? Um, Friends, I would argue, are an entirely different level, or I should say, friends, are an entirely different level because you're so comfortable and familiar with the connection, with the ties, with the meaning that you attach to the overall dynamic, right? And letting go of that can actually feel potentially like somewhat of death, maybe even like death of the self. Maybe you have tied your self worth to the person, whether it's a friend or a partner, right? People that have extrinsic self worth, they oftentimes tie their self worth to their friends, right? And so the important part here is to become aware of the tie that you have, right? It's to become aware of the entire dynamic and what it actually means. It's fascinating when you tie your self-worth to another person because the other person actually has nothing to do with your sense of self-worth. You have just learned to tie your self-worth to them because you were raised with extrinsic self-worth. It's not healthy. It's not good or bad or right or wrong, but it does very much dictate how you see yourself and how you are with relationships. So this whole matter of, you know, a decade out is all about recognizing like you can't have the insight in the moment until you are a decade out. Maybe for instance, you were so weary about letting go of everything. It's the same thing of realizing that you don't even look back at high school or college, even though you had these massive tests that you lost sleep over. Maybe these friends or people that you lost sleep over, but you don't even think about them anymore. And previously, you were very concerned about letting go of the connections that you had because you didn't really know the path forward. You didn't know what it was going to entail. So there was a lot of unknown, there was a lot of uncertainty. But that perspective of actually reaching that point where you are a decade plus out after cutting off the relationship is massively profound. Recently, I've been looking at all of these dynamics where I've chosen to cut off toxic people. No names, but some of these people were actually people that I considered like best friends until I found out that they actually weren't. And so it was important for me to cut them out because that led to my growth. I was a totally different person back then, and I am a totally different person now. Back then, I didn't value myself like I do now. Back then, I valued extrinsic self worth, right? Because I tied my self worth to them. Now, recognizing my self worth as intrinsic and entirely dictated on and based on me, I just don't see it the same way anymore. Maybe you want to step away from a job that you've been working forever because you're starting to realize that you're not passionate about it, but you're scared to take that first step, which is totally reasonable. Whether it's a friend, a job, a situation, whatever it is, you might be afraid to take that first step. But I can tell you right now that, and by the way, that's totally valid. I will 100% validate that. That's a real feeling. Being very comfortable and familiar in situations, whether relationships, jobs, situations, whatever it is. The unknown of what is outside of that is real, and it's very intimidating, and it also paralyzes people to like actually move forward. So the fascinating thing is that when you can actually have that perspective after the matter, and it takes time. It might not be a decade, it might be a year, it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years. The point is that perspective is required in order to be like, oh, wait a second, I totally lost sleep over this person and now I don't give a fuck anymore. Not that I don't give a fuck about them. I wish the best for them. I mean, I don't need to care. I really don't. It's my choice. I'm not a good or bad person for it, you know? It's not right or wrong of me to not care. I just choose to focus more on myself and to focus more on my own energy. And you have that perspective and you're like, wow, I wish I did this sooner. There have been so many times where I have cut people out of my life that I actually wish I had done it sooner. It's a real thing to wake up after you have blinked and be much older, because life goes by like that, and to realize, oh, wait a second, I could have done this a lot sooner and I would have saved a lot of time. This was going to happen anyway. I didn't have to worry about it like I chose to. That's real. That entire dynamic and perspective is real. So oftentimes it actually requires you to have that time and space outside of it to be like, oh, wow, I did not need to worry about that as much as I thought I did. I'm a totally different person now. I actually wish that I had let go of them sooner. Yeah, that's the reality of it. And who you become through the process is so important, you know? So, let me make this very clear as well. There was a point in time where I was afraid of being alone, where I was afraid of being by myself because I was like cutting out people left and right. And so at some point it kind of like turned into a dynamic where I was kind of just like imagine this is me. I was just like floating, right? I was like, "Oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know where I'm going." And there were times when I was hesitant to like continue moving forward and instead just kind of like default back to what was. And so I recognize now, because I'm a decade out and I have new friends, that are healthy, right? And the cool thing about it is that I just have totally transformed my life. I've transformed my perception of myself. And when you transform your perception of yourself, you transform the way that everyone else sees you. How you see yourself is how everyone else sees you. And if you transform that in a very powerful way, it completely transforms your life moving forward. You need, maybe not always, but at least sometimes, and I would argue more often than not, that viewpoint of being a decade out, of realizing, oh, wait a second, all I had to do was just let go of that friend that I actually found out was not my friend and be by myself. And then I got to learn more about myself, learn more about what it was that I actually needed in relationships that I wasn't getting because I was actually out of touch with what it was that I needed. And I'm doing so much better now. Oh, I just needed to take that first step in stepping away from the job that I was so comfortable with, but actually so deeply miserable with, and I was not at all passionate about. I felt burnt out. It was all just for the money. And now I'm a decade out and I have my own business and I'm doing what it is that I actually want to do. Oftentimes, we're channeling fear because the unknown is intimidating, because anything outside of comfort and familiarity makes us want to turn our head away because it's intimidating. It's the unknown. We don't know what's going to be there. And oftentimes, we are just instead projecting our beliefs of what the unknown is into the unknown, and it just continues to fuck everything up. Isn't it wild? Isn't it wild? I'll end off with this. Isn't it wild that we're so uncertain about it, right? We know that we're miserable. We know that the job is not what we want. We know that the person in our life is not beneficial for us. They're holding us back. And that's the reality of it. So it requires that step moving forward of being like, I'm just going to do this and see what happens. And I will actually end off with this. When you approach life from an experimental standpoint, I think that this could be like an overall highlight of the entire video. When you approach life from an experimental standpoint and kind of just like fuck around and find out, in a healthy way, of course, not to harm yourself or anybody else, but like, you might find that life is actually really fun. It's actually really magical. What if you let go of that person and you move forward because you're actually just realizing that they're not healthy for you and it's not going to work out? What if you do actually just let go of that job that you're actually miserable with and you choose yourself? You choose a business that you're actually passionate about. What if? Get really curious in that space of what if. What if I choose myself instead of all of these people that take advantage of me and that don't actually value me? What if I choose to value myself instead? What if you started asking yourself that question and actually put it into action and watch how your life transforms because of it? Experimenting like that is one of the coolest things that I'm kind of just like working through myself, and it's fun to see how powerful it is. In case you didn't know this, you can do anything, no matter what anybody has told you. And that's the reality of it. There are no limits. The only limitations, I mean, you've probably heard this before, but the only limitations out there are the ones that you place on yourself. Nobody and nothing out there is stopping you. I mean, maybe that sun right there because it's totally blinding, and if I try to walk that way, I'm probably going to trip over something. So take heed. But yeah.